Okay, well, welcome to today's special episode featuring Josh, our friend. We're going to be talking about his testimony, and you will get a chance also to comment and to ask a qualified theologian a question, someone who it won't be above their pay grade.
Yes.
So welcome, Josh.
Thank you.
Josh, as you can see by his many books and bookshelves, is an academic at heart. He's a master's in theology, and he's working on a second master's in counseling and psychotherapy right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I've known Josh for probably 6 years or so now, and you've known Booth for a couple since we sort of started the.
I'm Booth, just in case anyone wondered.
Sorry, mate.
I'm Booth, just in case anyone wondered.
Or Bevy.
Or Bevy.
Or Bevy.
Never works.
Yeah.
And yeah, Josh is a huge catalyst in us actually starting the podcast. It was after, if you've watched the previous testimonial, after my accident and Bevan sort of finding Christ. Bevan is an intellect. His lack of books in the background, don't let that distract you. He is an intellectual, but some of his questions were way above my pay grade, but I knew they weren't above Josh's. So I connected the three of us. And then after doing the 1 year Bible reading plan, we discussed about starting a podcast. And so obviously Josh is a big part of that. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who's tuned in to watch or listen to any episodes. And we just this week hit 500 downloads on Buzzsprout, plus then any YouTube. Buzzsprout is the podcasting website basically that everything posts to. But within that, we've actually now had downloads from the UK, Canada, and the US, as you would expect from the three of us. But also we're having regular downloads in Japan. We've still got downloads from Turkey, Spain, Hong Kong, New Zealand, South Korea, and Zimbabwe. So it's just incredible how the Lord has used this and let it spread. And actually, if you're listening to this and you have no idea who the three of us are, have no connection to us at all, please reach out, because we'd love to hear from you, whether you do that on Instagram or email or whatever. But as a part of that, I actually wanted to share something with you, Josh, which we hadn't told you about. But as an OG member, I wanted to present you, my friend, with, has that come across?
Oh, wow.
With your very own Two Brits and a Bible-esque. They call it a gig. But yeah, we had that commissioned and done for you based on your profile picture and basically what you're wearing today. That was convenient. But yeah, so I'll send that to you afterwards and use it as you wish. But we are just so thankful for having you as a part of the beginning of our journey. And yeah, that was sort of what I wanted to drop in there as well, really.
Thank you so much. It's beautiful.
Cool. All right. Well, we're going to get to Josh's testimony, but before we do that, I'd just love for the three of us to pray over this. So, Heavenly Father, thank you for this blessed day and every day before it and every day that is to come. I just thank you for our brother in Christ, Josh. I thank you for all of the wisdom and laughter he's given us already, and I'm so excited to see the Spirit working through him through this video and just everything else that he has to share to glorify you ultimately, Lord. So please just bless this time together. In your holy name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Indeed.
Thank you, God. Thank you, Bevan. Well, guys, I'm excited to be here, to be able to sit, I was going to say at the feet, but at the shoulders of two amazing friends of mine. And I just love these guys. We've done lots of Bible study together, and I just love that this is coming to fruition. So thanks, guys, for having me. I really appreciate it. When you guys asked me to do a testimony, I was thinking about this word and thinking about it. Essentially, it's a story of God moving in our lives. And, I have often thought about testimony as like a key moment where God has come in and done something. But I think to a certain degree, I mean, if you're looking at Paul, for example, the testimony is actually his whole life, right? There's the account where he was blinded and obviously, and then the scales removed from his eyes and he becomes a believer in Jesus. But his whole life is a testimony. It comes up all the time in those accounts where people are questioning him. So I say that to say I want to include a little bit of background. to a key moment in my life. So it doesn't just center around one particular moment.
Cool.
So I was raised in a Christian home, faithful parents, lovely family. And, you know, I don't know, I never really took necessarily the Bible very seriously, or prayer, I would say, for many years. I played a lot of video games, spent a lot of time in my room late at night playing video games, and super enjoyed that. And yeah, I would, you know, like everybody else, I would hang out with friends and do all that kind of stuff. I never really read, ironically, very much. I listened to a ton of music, which did feature heavily and does in my life.
Yeah.
And yeah, so if we fast forward a little bit, I was in high school and there was an opportunity for me to go and be a part of the military, which at that time was exciting. You know, I was 16 years old and I was like, hey, I can go shoot guns and learn to be more physically fit and just explore maybe the world through that. And lots of opportunities probably were to come of that potentially. And I joined up with my best friend at the time, and it was challenging and it kind of caught me off guard.
As you expect, joining the military, I think.
As you might expect. I was like, wow, this is actually very physically and mentally demanding.
Yeah. If there's a walk in the park, I'd question the Canadian military.
That's exactly right. Yes, that's a great perspective. And I was just thinking, there are Canadian military who are asked to go and train all kinds of folks, like, for example, snipers, but that's an aside.
Cool.
Yeah, so I joined the military and found it very challenging, which, as you said, is a good thing. And I was running one morning with my friend that I joined with, and I had been increasingly feeling winded. And I thought, man, I'm really out of shape. Before that, we'd like bike around, you know, every day together. And I just thought, I don't know, I thought I needed to get in better shape, which was, as I said, a reason to get in the military. And what it actually was I had a heart condition. And I didn't realize that. It is still called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And it basically means the heart has like two chambers and there's a muscle wall in the middle. And that muscle wall, as I did more and more exercise, ironically, would get thicker and thicker. And then my heart would become less efficient. So it wouldn't pump as much blood or oxygen on the way out. So I didn't realize any of that. I thought I was just winded because I was out of shape. And I was running one morning with him and I died. And just thinking about that, it's kind of remarkable. So my friend's with me. This is before we had cell phones. We're just a couple of teenage kids. And we were running before training that morning. We were running to Tim Hortons, a very Canadian thing to do. And I mean, most Canadians walk to Tim Hortons, and we, so we're running along and I just dropped dead. And he actually caught me. Like, the instinct of that man is wonderful. He caught me before I hit the ground. So I didn't at least hit the pavement. And he just sat with me on the street there. And there was luckily a guy who, it's more than lucky, you'll find out. There was a businessman there who happened to have a car phone, and his car was nearby. And so this is really dating me. I'm not actually that old, but believe it or not, cell phones were not as prevalent at that time. And so this guy called on his car phone the ambulance, and they were right around the corner. There's actually an ambulance station like 5 minutes from there, and they were just heading out. So they came very quickly, and it took them a while to bring me back to life. So what happens with a little bit of biology here is that when the brain is without oxygen, and all the organs, as a matter of fact, but especially the brain, there is potential permanent loss. There's potential damage. We're actually built and designed to be in, you know, constant state of reoxygenation and blood flow, which brings the oxygen and nutrients, right? So when that system is shut down, then the body really responds negatively, as you might imagine. And it was over 12 and a half minutes before they were able to shock me back. So defibrillator, like you see in the movies with the paddles, you know?
Yeah.
And they brought me back, and they told me later, those two paramedics, that it was the first sudden cardiac death, which is called SAVE, I think, in 6 years. Everybody else they had tried to bring back, they were unable to. Like, they never came back.
Wow.
And it actually touched both their lives quite a bit. I met them afterwards, and they visited several times our family home. So yeah, I found myself with a new lease on life. I kind of radically rethought what life was all about. And
did they expect you to make a full recovery, or were they like, okay, we've brought him back, but this, who knows?
So, great question. So I was in a drug-induced coma. So the doctor I had, I think, I'm not sure if it was a good call or not, but here we are. Because the damage was so bad at the time, he thought a sort of like a lengthened coma essentially would be better for me, so that the body could recover. So then my doctor, my GP, kind of ran in. She's this little Egyptian woman, and she's like a fireball. And she basically took over and took me out of the care of that particular doctor. And it was actually a very life-saving choice.
Wow.
And yeah, so I did psychological testing, which is ironic now because I'm a psychotherapist in training. I did extensive psychological testing, and they said, at first I was in the vegetative state in the coma. Then I came out of the coma, and they said, he's never going to be, what he even used to be, let's say. So like with, auditory, language skills, even like physical fitness, anything, the brain and body will just not be able to recover. And especially the same state. And as I started to hit those benchmarks in life, things just were overturned essentially. So every sort of prediction kept getting sort of pushed out of the way.
Sure.
And what I found out later was that there was basically an army praying for me all over the world. So my parents had been connected with church their whole lives, and they kind of got connected to like a worldwide prayer movement. So there was a ton of prayer going on. And I think sometimes we think, hey, does God even answer prayer? I've prayed for such and such for years. I prayed for a family member to be healed. And that can be such a challenging topic. I mean, we could probably spend easily a whole episode on that. But we have these accounts where God does, in miraculous ways, answer prayer, and in ways that we want, the things that we ask for. It's been said that God always answers prayer, but not necessarily with a yes. He could answer with a no. So I had all these people praying for me. I was making these like sort of steps of recovery that were far surpassing the predictions. And I found myself, I think, in a strange place because I was very thankful for life, but also I was young and my brain was not fully developed. I think that's about 25 before that happens.
Right. And late teens, you said?
Yeah, I was 16 when this happened.
Wow.
So I thought, hey, I'm invincible. I thought, there's a certain purpose in my life, and no matter what I do, I can't screw that up. So I made, I think, some very foolish decisions and hurt some people and hurt myself in a lot of ways, relationally, emotionally, sometimes physically. And that was I needed to wake up from that too, I think. So sometimes, you hear these stories of people, God's doing a miraculous work in our lives. And then I don't know if you always hear that other account where you feel like, it's maybe a pride issue where you feel like, hey, I'm supposed to be around, and I like, especially for my own gain, and this is for me. And I've now realized that is not at all what the purpose of my life is. It's not so I can live and, do the things necessarily that I want to do, although God's gracious and he gives me things to do, gives me passions of my heart that I can pursue. But I was lost. And I think that was probably the most evident it ever was in my life, that I was lost.
Wow.
Because I had this new lease on life and I was just meandering, making foolish decisions.
But can I just check, you were obviously still a Christian at that time.
I was.
Your perspective just got warped slightly, right?
Exactly. That's right. Yes. And so some people, I think some people really struggle with that. They say, hey, I'm a Christian. Why isn't my life perfect? Why isn't my life easy? Why isn't my life straightforward? Let's say, why isn't the plan so clearly laid in front of me? I have a nice stress ball. I like to squeeze it.
I have my classic little.
Yeah, I love it. It's great. And I think it's a fair question. And I think there's kind of a lot of nuance to that. And, each of us are on a journey, and that sounds very cliche, but it's true. We're individuals. God creates us with purpose, a plan, and he has his will for us. And we also have our own will. Mm-hmm. And Bevan and I have talked about this a bit. It could be a very complex kind of rabbit hole that maybe we can get down sometime. But the idea is that I had to learn to trust God in those moments. I had to learn to and I'm still learning to trust God throughout, an unknown future. I don't really know what the future holds. None of us saw COVID coming, for example. And, it's just, we just really don't know what's coming. And I think that's very relatable to a lot of us, whether that's in personal relationships, finance, job, economy, law, like everything, church. So I think that's really important to highlight. So I got involved in a church that was kind of outside of my the one I grew up in, like sort of the cultural milieu I grew up in. And I got involved with worship because I had some skill that God gave me in playing instruments and singing. So I was able to fit in.
I don't have to jump here. When you say some skill, for the listeners and watchers, an exceptional level of skill. Any instrument you throw Josh towards, he just picks it up and plays. It's sickening. Carry on. I'm not
well,
at all.
Depends on who you're comparing to, but sure, God has given me absolutely, I think, a gift to bless people with music and worship, and I really am super thankful for that. Even there, it's a great example of how, I wasn't always using that for God. So I spent a lot of time, playing bars and pubs, or the combination called bubs. It's a new thing.
I like it.
I like it too. And it's interesting because God used that experience. So there's so many years, right, of doing that, playing till like 2 a.m. and then sometimes getting home at 5 if it's a couple hours away.
Yeah.
And over every single weekend, sometimes during the weeknights, for years and years and years, different varieties of music, different genres. And God has used that because before this psychotherapy position that I have now, I was a worship pastor. Mm-hmm. And that came out of essentially all that experience of playing in bars and pubs or bubs. And I'm very thankful for God using every bit of our experience and our lives, even though we think, hey, this is just for me. I'm just doing this for me. I find this fun. I find this interesting. Mm-hmm. And God says, I'm going to use that for my glory, which is amazing. And that's essentially what worship is, right? We're glorifying God. So he turns our whole lives into worship to him. It's amazing. Yeah. So I think, so I got into theological studies while I was in going to the University of Waterloo. And I did a degree in philosophy before that. I think just before that, it's important to note, a lot of people look at education as such it is challenging as a rite of passage, let's say, or, achievement. It is an achievement as well. But I didn't even necessarily have that opportunity early on in life. And it was only after I had died and it began to make that recovery, again, against all those predictions with the testing, that I was able to have the focus, let's say, and the opportunities to really apply myself academically. And when that really worked out, I went to Conestoga College first and was doing very well. And all my profs were like, you should probably try university out. Maybe college is not the height of your career. So I took their advice and I went to University of Waterloo, and I just went in kind of a general studies program. I was going to do music because I had some experience in that. And I fell in love with philosophy, and I still love philosophy. This whole section right here actually is philosophy, interestingly enough. So yeah, that just helped me understand a lot about how to think and how to reason. And I came in contact with apologetics, and we've talked about that quite a bit in this group as well, which is essentially like defending your faith. Yeah. But it's not always from the outside. Let's say in other conversations, we're sometimes defending the faith to our own questions. We're answering right things that we wrestle with. So there's a lot of powerful utility in apologetics. So then I was able to get into a master's of theological studies because I wanted to pursue that. And that's when I became a worship pastor. And then I got the opportunity to study psychotherapy, which is something that I've always wanted to do. And that was totally a God moment. I had reached out to a psychotherapist who runs a clinic and just asked for some questions. I was curious about the career. And we really hit it off. And she basically said, you seem like a great fit. When do you want to start? And I was like, okay, let's do that. So I still view myself very much as a minister of the gospel, but in a different context now. And that was just an amazing opportunity for me. So I thank God for life itself and for opportunities and for overcoming immense barriers.
Yeah, absolutely, man. That's awesome. I know, again, for those people sort of watching and listening, I've known Josh a long time, so I'm aware of that testimony. This is brand new information to Bevan. I'm going to ask a sort of a loaded question because I know the answer to it, but what have doctors and stuff done or recommended to prevent anything like that ever happening again?
In terms of my own?
In terms of dying.
You mean for all of us or just for me?
Just for you. What did they do for you?
So I have a defibrillator installed in my chest. So it's an ICD. And basically it's actually gone off a few times, but it's right here. And it's a metal box. It's my second one. And just like those paddles rub together and they shock you, that's what this does. And I've had that happen several times. Also running. I should probably not run very much. Has gone off in many a year, but basically the idea is that our wonderful medical personnel, they have given me the ability to have a safeguard. And I really appreciate that because I've actually tested that safeguard several times and I'm still here to do this podcast by God's grace and by his grace in medical technology. So yeah, that's part of it. I was also on medication when I first started, Tenolol, beta blocker.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and a blood thinner. So that really slowed me down, I found.
Okay.
Like physically, mentally, I just felt tired all the time. I felt kind of held back. So I actually got off that very early on.
Okay. Well, that's a very similar set of emotions to having children, feeling drained, worn out, emotionally. Yeah.
Something I'm also blessed to know, right? So I have a wonderful wife and two lovely children. And that's been also by the grace of God in every possible way. And man, it changes life completely in such positive ways.
It's so cool. We've got a few minutes before we need to sort of push on to another little topic here. Boob, do you have any immediate questions from your own hearing of that?
Well, as soon as you said that you died, I was like, what do you mean you died? And then you saying that your brain and organs were starved of oxygen for 12 and a half minutes. I mean, one question I think that people might have, and I have, is just so you were saying there were these markers. So you were in an induced coma. When you came out of that, were you still in a somewhat vegetative sort of condition for a while?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Wow. And so it was literally a slow recovery. It wasn't like you immediately. It took months or even years to get back.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
And isn't that even more miraculous in some sense? Because I think it's fairly binary normally, isn't it? The damage is done and it is not really reversible. And yet somehow for you, it reversed.
I just Googled how long can the body last without oxygen? And it says time is very important when an unconscious person is not breathing. Permanent brain damage begins after only 4 minutes without oxygen, and death can occur as soon as 4 to 6 minutes later. So effectively, you were 3 times what it would have given you as permanent damage. Yet here you are. The only permanent damage is being friends with 2 Brits.
A permanent blessing. It was actually recorded in a few medical journals too, because it was so kind of abnormal, which is interesting.
Wow.
Unreal.
Do you remember yourself slowly coming back into like consciousness and like that process? And like, this is a loaded question also in some sense. Did you remember asking God for any of that or anything like that? Or do you think it was purely being asked for from your family and the network of Christians out there praying for you?
So I would say it's purely sort of external, let's say, like friends and family and strangers praying for me, because I was not in a state to even ask for those things. And sometimes, which I thought you were going to ask, sometimes people ask, did you see a light? Did you like did you meet God? Did you have some sort of like out of body experience? And I did not. And sometimes that, I don't know, sometimes I think it's disappointing to people because we see that as like, that would be proof that God exists, you know? And for some it is. And I don't know, I think that's a very interesting piece, because there wasn't that. It was, okay, here's what it was like. It was like, we're talking right now, and then you blink and it's 2.5 weeks later, and you're lying in a hospital bed, not knowing anything about what happened at all.
Wow.
See, in my opinion on this is you died, but that the out of body experiences, I think, is where your soul is actually leaving to the next plane of existence. I think that you were still alive and fighting that whole time, even through the coma. That's just my belief of why you didn't see anything potentially.
Interesting. Well, even from a psychotherapeutic perspective, there is different states of dissociation, for example, like personality disorders, for example, on the spectrum. And lots of people report that if they're highly dissociative, so they can actually, there's people that have, I don't know, just even experiences of sitting watching TV. You can have that. If you're triggered by something, you can actually, it's sort of like a brain's defense mechanism, nervous system. And you can go, it's like an out of body experience. You sort of watch what's happening to you. And it's a way to, defend you from the trauma potentially of what's going on. So yeah, there's all kinds of levels to that, interestingly, but I did not have such an experience.
That's something that we'll need to talk about at some point, just OBEs, out of body experiences.
Yes.
By all of that. But,
yes.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing your testimony, Josh. I mean, honestly, that was the first time I'd heard it, and that is truly amazing.
You're so welcome.
It's so powerful, man. I love hearing it every time. I've probably only heard it 3 times or so, but it's so cool. Absolutely love it. So sort of kicking on the intro to this, we were saying about basically posing a question to a qualified theologian, a master's in theology. And so we want to give anyone who's seen this, anyone who's been following the channel or what have you, the opportunity to ask. You'll have known by now that one of Bevan and I's favorite sayings is that's above our pay grade. We know it shouldn't be above Josh's. At least it's far closer to being within his pay grade.
Probably still out of mind, yes.
And so we wanted to give everyone the opportunity to ask Josh a question that could have been on your heart for days, weeks, months, years, something that's just sort of jumped into your head. We'd love for you to engage with us on email and Instagram. This isn't the end of the episode. It sounds like I'm winding up. I'm not. There's more to come. But yeah, at 2 Brits in a Bible on Insta or 2britsbible@gmail.com if you want to get involved with us on that. But to give you a bit of an idea on the kind of stuff we're looking at, we both have a question for the masters in theology, the master of theology himself, Mr. Joshua Kuehnel. So, Beav, I think you're going to kick us off on this one, and then, just to give you an idea on.
I was just going to add to that any question, right? So it could be you are a lifelong Christian and you just have some practical, asking for practical advice, or it could be a scriptural kind of question, or it could be a doctrinal question. So, I've asked Josh all of the different types of questions in our friendship, in fairness. The one I'm going to ask is more of a practical Christian question. So I have been sort of potentially seeking changing churches. And the reason for that is I feel like maybe there are certain elements of the liturgical church that I go to at the moment that aren't fully feeding certain parts of my faith that maybe would be helpful. There are lots of things I like about it though. And as I potentially seek that path, I just think it'd be really great to hear what some of the core elements I should be looking for are, like what some of the priorities should be for me to choose the best church, possible for every Sunday and beyond.
Well, first off, thank you, Bevy, for being vulnerable in that question. I think this is something that a lot of us think about. And increasingly, especially in North American culture and probably Western European culture especially, there is a desire to find the right fit in terms of a church that will feed us, in the ways that we want. And I think that usually means, to a certain degree, giving us, good worship, good preaching, good teaching, and good sort of fellowship. There's a couple of pieces to this, I would say. One is, and Bevy's sick of me saying this to answer all of his questions, but I think we need to follow the Spirit's leading in this. There is a certain aspect of...
He's so upset he's left. There he is.
There's a certain aspect to, what we're doing, let's say as Christ followers, that is beyond I don't want to put it that way. I was going to say beyond the intellectual, there's a huge intellectual component to faith, obviously. The history of Christianity proves that time and time again. But in terms of like the teaching aspect, there is, if it's teaching the Bible, if it's a biblically based church, I think that is a win. If it has Jesus-centered, like Christ-centric worship, I think that is also a win and a good thing to focus on. And if it has, let's say, vulnerable sort of communal life. So we have a tendency to hide, I think, a lot, especially in North America, and say, life is great. How are you, brother? You know, that kind of thing. And we really hide what's really going on. And I see that a lot in my office. So I think it's really important to, find a vulnerable community that you can worship with too. And maybe the most so is being led. So sometimes we think, this isn't checking the boxes. This isn't what I want in a church. I think be really honest with yourself. And I'm talking to all of us. What is it that God calls us to in a worshiping community? What are my skills and sort of abilities that I can add to a worshiping body? Can I benefit this church in some way? Whatever I'm not seeing, whether it be worship, teaching, preaching, community life, anything else, like helping, blessing the community, let's say. Can I do that? Can I start that myself? We were challenged by that actually by a pastor, my wife and I, years ago. We said, you know what? We think it'd be great if the church did this thing. And he's like, that's great. When are you starting? And we're like, oh, but we were talking about you doing it. And he's like, yeah, I know. I get that all the time. When are you guys going to start? And I think that was one of the best answers we could ever hear, because then that drove us into a life of, I would say, very active, intentional ministry, whether we were on staff somewhere or not. And that has yielded just unbelievable amounts of fruit. So I would say be led in the Spirit and be willing to challenge. Let's be willing to challenge our own assumptions about what we need in a church, and get out of sort of like what I would call a consumerist mindset, and get into more of like a giving mindset, right? Like, what can I bless this community with? What's God given me to bless this community with?
Brilliant. That's such a great answer. Thank you.
No,
you're welcome.
I know we want to sort of make sure this episode stays under the 40-minute barrier, so we've got a few minutes to play with here. The question that I had for you is, my wife Melody read a story on the internet, and effectively it was a family escaping war, a war-torn country, who tried to escape into Canada, and actually part of their pursuit to find freedom and a better life, they actually ended up dying because of freezing temperatures in Canada in winter. And this was a husband, wife, presumably husband and wife, don't know, but a couple with a teenager and a baby. And it hit Melody really hard, and obviously myself as well, just how unfair that is, but more along the lines of, if that family didn't know God, let's say, for example, potentially they were Muslim, not sure, if that family didn't know God and didn't even have an opportunity to hear the gospel, but they've died at the hands of other people effectively, how can a God that we know is loving and just and true and everything, how can God allow them to be in hell for eternity because they didn't have the opportunity to hear his good news and accept it for themselves? You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know this is a very long answer, but
I was going to say, I totally relate to the nature of this. And thanks for doing that when we have like 4 minutes left. I think there are some, let's say, key considerations that come to mind for me when I hear this. Like, the weight of it is huge, right? So there's something about kind of trusting your own heart in this. So there's a reason that maybe that answer, like, we don't know what happens, how could they go to hell, let's say, which is an assumption, that speaks to our heart being for justice. And, we cry out at the injustice of that potentially. And I think that's worth noting, right? That there's this component that feels so uncomfortable to us. And that's a good thing, because it's not easy for us to just say, well, 1 + 2 = 3. Like, this is an equation, and we just follow the process, and that's our answer. I think with these kind of questions, there is so much unknown, right? So we don't know what their faith is. We don't know if they know Jesus. And I mean, the Bible's pretty explicit about everyone having an opportunity. So they wouldn't have been left without an opportunity. And I pray that they did accept Christ. When we talk about accepting Christ, I mean, Jesus says himself, obey me, like follow the teachings that I'm giving. Listen to my words, those who hear them and listen to them, right? If you think about at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is talking about the person who builds their house on solid ground. And that's the person who listens and obeys, right? So hears, not just hears it, but also does it.
Yeah.
I think that's possible to do without reading the Bible. And the reason that might be controversial to some of us modern Christians is that most Christians throughout history have not had a Bible, interestingly. I mean, the printing press, what was it, the 1500s? I should have checked that, but
Gutenberg.
Yeah, and the Gutenberg, the first book printed on the Gutenberg actually was the Bible. But before that, access to the Bible, access to books in general, especially in the ancient world, were very expensive. Basically, very few people could access them. And some scholarly work on the literacy of the ancient world has actually been updated. So more people were literate than we think, but books were way more expensive than we could ever imagine. So access to actual books, right? There's no Wikipedia, there's no like Gutenberg library like we have now, or Amazon.
1440, just so you knew.
Okay, so very close. So I think these are all components, right? I think having a heart for loss, that's close to the heart of God, right? God grieves over that family just as we do, and much more so. And in fact, we grieve, I think, because we're made in the image and likeness of God. So we feel what God feels to a certain degree, to a lesser degree, I think. So we should grieve with that family and pray for them. And
cool.
Yeah, I just hope in our own lives that when we have opportunities to get into situations like that, we encounter situations like that we share the gospel through our lives.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you, dude. Well, we're pretty much on wrap-up time. There's going to be one question which we're going to ask every guest we have. And it's a question that I've stolen from another golf podcast that I watched called Golf Life with Tubes. But it's, if you could meet anyone from the Bible and have dinner with them, who would it be and why? And you've probably got about a minute and a half before we need to push this out.
So I think this is an interesting question. I like it. So you didn't say I can't use Jesus.
Okay.
But,
sure, go on.
Right? But aside from Jesus, who we already have within us and know, and God grants us relationship with him, which is amazing, I would say Enoch. And there's so many people like David, Paul, Moses, man, there's so many. I think Enoch, because he didn't die, so he was taken up to be with God. God essentially like called him to himself. Mm-hmm. And the Bible says he walked with God. And Enoch, he was before the modern era. So there's something special about anybody in sort of the biblical era, because they were not inundated with the kind of information and like overload we are. So there's something, I don't want to romanticize it. It was hard life, but there's something purer about that kind of life, especially in terms of reflection. And obviously you can't hide from God. So I think Enoch would have been a very reflective person. He would have been very interesting to talk to, and he had a heart very near God, clearly. So he'd be fascinating to sit down with.
Perfect. Thank you. We're going to be right on the limit of 40 minutes on Zoom here. Boob, do you want to sign off for us quick?
Yeah, well, just thank you so much, Josh. And if any of you have any questions, please comment below or comment on Instagram or email, as we've said. Josh, thank you again. And please consider liking and subscribing this to help spread the word of God.